something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club. Devil's Chess Club.
Welcome to Devil's Chess Club. I'm Aaron Good. Before the main discussion today, I want to thank all of our Patreon subscribers for their support. If it weren't for all of you, we would not be able to do this. If you are not a subscriber, you are missing out on hundreds of hours of content which illuminate the organized criminal entity that is the U.S. Empire. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. All right, I am here with two graduate students, Bryce Green, who we all know, and Tonery Rogers. Tonery, it's great to have you here.
It's great to be here.
And Bryce, great to be with you as always.
Always good to be back.
So the three of us were together in Washington, D.C. recently for the Turning the Tide event to cover 9/11 related issues and 9/11 disclosure, essentially, advocate for it. And this was quite an interesting conference, which was overshadowed by the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which was very inconvenient because it prevented Tucker Carlson from addressing the group as he was planning to do. And I think this was a remarkable conference for a number of reasons, which we'll get to. But we started off the conference with a whole lot of technical and scientific talks and investigations and presentations. And I guess I could start with you, Tonery. What was you're an academic, so you're coming from and you're an associate of social sciences, humanities, right? Historian. What was your take on the technical presentations? Because I'm also not educated in physics and engineering and so on, but I saw these presentations and have some general opinion on them. What do you make of what we were shown in those days, or especially in that first day?
Well, I think for the first day, it was very, as you said, scientific heavy, and it makes sense from a strategic standpoint to sort of cover all your bases with regards to the idea of controlled demolitions, how many people said they witnessed explosions, the notion of things like thermite at ground zero. So it was very thorough, and I definitely appreciated that. I would say as the conference progressed, we had certain political actors come in and give their takes, and melding both of those two, I think was smart. It was a good strategy. I would have appreciated more on the political side, because I think a lot of the science has been settled. We all know about the Fairbanks, Alaska study. We all know that this was likely controlled demolition. So where are we going to go from here? How can we move the needle a little bit more on the political angle?
Right. And for me, the Building 7 thing was really so obvious, and then their presentations on the two other towers, I'm not really super invested in them one way or the other, but I tend to think that the case that they make is pretty persuasive for a person who isn't that familiar with physics. Bryce, what was your take on these presentations?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that the focus on the towers has been one of the, I guess, most public things about people who are investigating 9/11, people who disagree with the official version. But it is always good to go over that, and having a few different presenters go over things like like the explosions. One of the more interesting technical presentations that I thought was the seismic evidence for explosions, or I guess a seismic event before the actual time of the collapse. It reminded me of
a cover up too, sort of.
Yeah, and a cover up. It's like it's a lot like the acoustic evidence in the JFK assassination, right? When in a book, Don Thomas's book, Hear No Evil, which has it's a mixed bag, but the acoustic evidence is really where he shines. He just calculates based on the distances in Dealey Plaza, based on the echoes that can be heard in the acoustic evidence, like where these bullets are coming from, and a plausible explanation for like a scenario there. It seemed to be like exactly the same thing that was going on here, which is totally convincing. But as you said, Tonery, it's not very political, right? If you understand that there was an explosion before the actual collapse, well, what does that get you? Who does that get you? Maybe you can go and talk to some of the people who covered it up, but I mean, they're scientists. They can justify whatever they want, however they want, just like we saw with the Kennedy assassination. One of the star witnesses for the States case was a guy named Luis Alvarez, NASA scientist, Nobel Prize winner, and he comes out with the story saying, well, JFK's head could have gone back with the shot from the back, and then concocted all this fake science to justify it. You can go look at the Mellon experiments that make absolutely no sense. But you can... none of that gets at the why. None of that gets at the broader geopolitics. None of it gets at the CIA, Israel angle. And so, in my view, the conference was not harmed by that. No, not by any means. But it was lacking. It was lacking that political angle.
Yeah, I think I was the only more political speaker on the first day, if I recall, and I just dealt more with political history, and most of it well before 9/11.
Even Ron Johnson, the Senator Ron Johnson was there, and he had very little to say. I mean, I suspect that he was there mostly to pick up on the conspiracy grift that right-wing, politicians are doing now. They're signaling to the people that, oh yeah, no, I care about 9/11 truth. Oh, I care about the deep state. Oh, I care about all this stuff. But he had nothing to say. In fact, one of the things that he said was, I'm sure you guys expected more from me. But then he leaves, and then everyone's giving him books, and he's like, no, please leave me alone. I just want to go home.
And his speech felt like a lecture. But don't get your hopes up. There won't be a new commission in the Congress. If you want that, it needs to be public, like a public commission that you all organize. And then, insinuating that the movement is very disorganized and you need to get it together.
Yeah. I mean, there is, and let's be real, the movement, such as it is, the collection of people there they disagree over points on the case, which is, that's what you'd expect. The Pentagon is a big issue. Controlled demolition is a big issue. Whether the pilots were piloted or remote piloted is an issue. But on top of that, it's a politically kind of incoherent group as a whole because of right-wing, more conspiracism of a right-wing bent generally, that it's people who basically agree, they accept a lot of the mythology of American democracy and American capitalism, and then they see it as being undone by some conspirators, that if we could just catch them, it would solve the problem. And I feel like that is very pervasive on the internet. There's a whole lot of right conspiracy people, and there's very little leftist integration of the reality of clandestine statecraft into left-wing analysis of imperialism and how empire functions. So that to me was another. I already was aware of this, but it really came home to me in some of the conversations that I had, that there's not a coherent critique of imperialism and capitalism especially. And I kind of blame the institutional left for some of this, and then the right is good at the right and the regime itself, which is a right-wing regime that we live under, they're good at confusing people and flooding it with so much noise and playing to people's prejudices that we're very confused politically. What did you think about this, Bryce? Because you talked about the idea of 9/11 as this floating signifier, which I think is really about correct. But how did you feel about the politics or lack of politics in certain ways?
Well, yeah. So the floating signifier, I think, describes the depoliticized version of 9/11 very perfectly, because you can project whatever you want on it. Like you say, it's just bad guys screwing up my ideal government. Whatever that is, it's up to the person. If you don't have a political understanding of that, some guys with these geopolitical objectives, these like very concrete geopolitical objectives, did this. If you don't see that, then you don't have to ask the questions about these geopolitical objectives. If you just see, hey, the government lied, well, then you can project whatever you want on that. You could say it was, aliens, it was people protecting UFOs, it was Jewish space lasers, it could be anything. And as long as you're just in this world where you know that the official story is true, but you don't really do work to uncover a plausible alternative, then it does become this floating signifier. Then libertarians, right-wingers, leftists, apolitical, lizard people, QAnon folks, they can all project what they want to on 9/11. And maybe it was different in the early days when it was like, okay, well, Bush did 9/11 and we hate Bush. But after the Bush years, the discourse about 9/11 really dissipated. Questioning it became more taboo, and there was no immediate enemy that you could point to and be like, this guy did that. And so it all just became about, whatever people wanted to project onto it. And that's very dangerous, but it's also very useful if you're people in power. The same thing with the Kennedy assassination, the same thing with Jeffrey Epstein, the same thing with all of these deep events. If you're able to just place the blame on some amorphous external actor without actually examining the current system and how the institutional arrangements and institutional secrecy led to this event, well, then you're going to be spinning your wheels for decades. And that seems to be what a lot of people in this movement have been doing, right? Like, fast forward, go back to 2004, right? Nothing about the technical aspects has really been updated. Maybe there are some more details, maybe there are some more studies.
The thermite and other discoveries were made. There were other things that built to the kind of fundamental case that they have.
Well, if I recall correctly, people were suggesting nanothermite pretty quickly, like before Bush left office.
I don't know when the Harriet piece was, but I think it was after 2004, because that was when they actually analyzed the dust and came up with these pictures. But you're basically correct. I mean, I'm just quibbling about little details, but it's most of the main critiques that people could make were out there, along with a lot of garbage too, that was put out to confuse people.
But then throughout that time, there were actual investigations being done. Like, you have the Joint Congressional Inquiry, you have the Inspector General from the CIA and and the FBI. And then of course you have the big 9/11 Commission. Like, they uncovered a lot of interesting stuff. They kind of hid it and lied about it and put it in footnotes, yeah. But they found a lot of interesting stuff that it doesn't look like people in the mainstream 9/11 truth movement, whatever that means. But it seems like they haven't really picked up on that.
Yeah,
like Kevin Fenton, the guy who wrote Disconnecting the Dots based on that, that book came out in 2011, over 10 years ago. But he stopped doing work on 9/11 because he was like, well, everyone here is kind of crazy, and it's kind of affecting my mental health. So I'm just not going to write anymore. And if anyone wants to talk to me about it, I'll point them to this book and then tell them to leave me alone.
Yeah. Tonery, what was your take on the strange political flavor of the event? I found everybody, even the conservative people, to be friendly and nice and fairly open-minded in some ways. I think they really hate the culture war left, and they associate, for the people that are more on the right side of it, they really associate the left with culture war stuff, and they hate them for that.
Yeah, I was disappointed that there weren't more young people there. I think Bryce and I were...
White and old.
Yes, yeah. And Bryce and I were probably the youngest people there.
Easily.
Yeah, there was a lot of lumping 9/11 in with COVID and everything that was going on with COVID, which obviously there's a lot to be said about COVID. But I don't understand why they were just being paired at a 9/11 maybe because of Ron Johnson.
Strategy. But I think that there's also the whole Make America Healthy thing. There's a lot of COVID skepticism on the right.
Well, one of the organizers was from Children's Health Defense, which is RFK Jr.'s outfit.
Mm-hmm.
But also, Pierce wrote, I think this was last year, like last December, he wrote an article analyzing 9/11 and COVID-19 as SDEs, as structural deep events. It's a pretty decent paper, and I could easily see how COVID looms so large in people's minds today that it might be the low-hanging fruit as a go-to. But you're right. It's like, why are we... Like,
I mean,
there's so much other things going on.
Let me point out two parallels that are pretty damning just on their surface. Everybody knows that Al-Qaeda came about because of U.S. clandestine state, that they organized these networks of logistics and paramilitary violence, right, to use against the Soviets, and then they used them in the 90s, which everybody tries to, make you forget. And then on COVID, where did this virus come from? Well, we apparently created that too. I mean, this is what the person who headed the Lancet's investigation, Jeffrey Sachs, said. He concluded that it was the real responsibility lies with U.S. bioweapons. So it's not like for no reason that there would be an affinity between these two groups, because you get the Patriot Act and then you get the lockdowns, and both of those are not. Those are strengthening the fascistic parts of the state.
Yeah, and it's also another floating signifier, right? Like like COVID-19, people were blaming the radical left, China, the World Economic Forum, and people were blaming Soros. Anyone. George Soros himself. It's the same way, and there was never really a moment where there's like, hey, this is the official COVID story, take it or leave it. It's always just been up in the air, right? Has there been like an investigation into COVID-19? Like there was the investigation to the origins that Jeffrey Sachs was a part of, but that didn't seem to that wasn't on the same level as like the 9/11 Commission.
Right. No, I don't think there can be, because everything is classified on both. There's a lot of things that people put together, and that Sachs makes a pretty compelling case when you hear him talk about it. But I don't think no one with investigatory power has had full access to the communications and documents of the Wuhan lab.
Yeah.
Or whatever Ralph Barrick was doing. All these things they fall under national security, as I understand it.
I know Rand Paul has been trying to, and his requests have been denied.
Yeah, Rand Paul's one of those guys who's always knocking on the door of like very interesting things, but he never seems to follow up with them.
You only have so much power as a senator anyway. I mean, honestly, they don't have the people that are on the intelligence committee are vetted to be people that are not going to expose secrets, and the other people don't have easy access to all of these materials, as I understand it. There's just a ton of things that people don't have access to. I mean, if back in the early 70s, Richard Nixon couldn't get Richard Helms to give him, the files related to JFK. I think in particular he may have been looking to get the Inspector General report on the assassination plots. That LBJ, it was ordered under LBJ, right? And I think that's, for example. But if the president can't get certain classified documents, back when we still had something of a democracy in the early 70s, such as it was, then you have to think that today it's even worse, like for all of these super sensitive things.
Yeah, and a lot of them are probably like Congress people, senators. They're probably resigned to this fact. Like I was talking with someone who was running for Congress, like a while ago, and we were just having a frank conversation about the security state and all this stuff. And I said, well, I mean, would you be in favor of like a modern day church committee to like reinvestigate all this stuff? He said, absolutely not. I don't want to die. They know what's up. And I was reading American Deep State, Peter Dale Scott's, I think, 2015 book, excellent book, where he was talking about some of the continuity of government stuff, which, by the way, if you didn't know, a few weeks ago, Trump reauthorized the state of emergency from 9/11. But according to the law, Congress is supposed to review everything about this every 6 months, right? Like that's in the National Emergency Act or whatever, but they haven't done that not a single time since. And Peter was talking about in the book how he was working with some congressmen, some senators to try and demand a review, try and force the hand of the administrations. And he said that one of the senators or congressman, I can't remember which one, but he said that, yeah, I asked about it, and they said that the review is negated by the state of emergency. And so there's really nothing I can do. So it's a question of, well, are we still governed by like a set of rules that are written on paper, or are we just governed by just arbitrary power that was seized in an emergency, that was seized in a deep event, and that everyone just seems to just allow? Like, no one seems to be challenging it at all. Just like that, I didn't see a single report about the reauthorization of the state of emergency this past week. Last year, there was like 1 or 2 reports. The year before that, maybe 1. But these things are completely under the radar. But as Peter said, like it would be a real test of our system to try and get some sort of congressional review. But no one has the appetite for it. Probably Ron Johnson doesn't even have the appetite for it. He has the appetite to show up at a thing, but I don't consider him to be like, a bastion of integrity or curiosity. But it's just one of those things that really lays bare the deficits of the American democracy.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm gonna talk a little bit about what I presented there. I obviously can't. I couldn't even get close to finishing it. It was sort of poorly planned on my part. I had about 3 hours worth of material. I now realize that I thought I could just, I'll just spend 40 seconds on each one. Well, that was kind of foolish, but I was so immersed in it, and I wanted to make the argument that I make. So I'm going to pull up a few things. There's probably like 3 slides I really want to look at in any sort of depth, but I presented the Gray Alliance, how neoconservatives took over the American deep state, and I'm building on these articles that I was doing, putting out at Substack, but also this huge podcast series that we have on the American Exception podcast that Max Arvo and I are doing. I meant to give, in my presentation I mentioned Lance DeHaven Smith, and I dedicated the talk to him, and I also mentioned David Talbot. I meant to mention Max Arvo because his work he's been my partner on this, and his research has been awesome, but I can't remember if I did or not, so I want to make sure I mentioned Max Arvo here because he's helped me a lot on this. And pretty much a lot of the times I'm thinking about these different things related to the timeline of, the post-World War II era, and I suggest something about an angle, and then Max goes and finds things on it that are crazier than I would have guessed in the first place, so it's been really cool. I did take out ultra-Zionist neoconservatism from the title, and I just left it as neoconservatism, but it's basically what I am trying to convey. And I really go back further than 9/11, and I look at Lansky early on, but there's this concept that in the past, Bryce, when you were talking about continuity of government and saying that we are governed in some non-constitutional way, that's really about the exception in a sense, that as you know, which is a key part of my book, my dissertation, which deals with
the name of the show.
Yeah, exactly. It deals with officials who are able to override the law, and then when you have an emergency, quote unquote, like the global communist conspiracy, you essentially institutionalize the exception, which is really kind of a Nazi concept from Carl Schmitt, but it really would go back further than that to any time that a government or a state, a civilization, is in crisis, then the powers that be tend to act without any restraint or legal restraint, right? If you just go back to earlier pre-modern times, even same thing. So there's that, the exception to the rule of law. But also what we have in the U.S., which I think is under-theorized in social science, especially when you get into the history of deep events, which almost is not even a part of social science because the mainstream of social science accepts that whatever the state says is true. But if we know that's not the case, then we have to look at things differently. The fix, which everybody knows kind of what it is if you think the fix is in, but I wanted to define it here for our purposes. And what I came up with was an institutionalized, deep political arrangement in which law enforcement is neutralized in relation to a going, rent-seeking, criminal enterprise, i.e. a racket. And I felt that this was a way to understand what happened to corrupt the apex of power in the U.S. And so I started all the way back in 1945-ish, really Operation Underworld begins before that. But the U.S. partners with Meyer Lansky, and he's the guy who has a monopoly, essentially. His organization has a monopoly on the national distribution of drugs and essentially the international drug traffic. And he is partnered with the government, and Harry Truman gives him the Medal of Freedom in 1945, and he establishes Las Vegas around the same time to deal with a new drug connection he set up in Mexico, and that this just entails a crazy amount of corruption. And oh yeah, on top of it, he is a Mossad asset, such that the only time Lansky ever gets in trouble with the law and the U.S. tries to pursue him, he flees to Israel, basically until it's safe to come back because Richard Nixon is... Watergate is about to overtake him, and the burglars are already in jail, but he's won re-election, and there we were. So anyway, this idea of the fix as being a huge part of American political economy, and it was protected by FBI people like J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and the head of CIA counterintelligence, all protected the Lansky syndicate, which, in addition to controlling the national drug traffic and laundering all the proceeds essentially through Las Vegas and other, banking enterprises elsewhere, they corrupted the municipalities all over the place because these same people were tied to the racing wire, the gambling, the sort of national gambling network that could corrupt law enforcement sort of systematically in major cities across the U.S., and that this represents a kind of corruption that is beyond imagining and for most people, and that explains why Lansky said, I think he said this back in the late 30s, but I could be wrong about the date, he said the syndicate is bigger than U.S. Steel, which was the biggest corporation in the U.S., and that might be true in terms of dollars, and it's more than likely true in terms of political influence, because this is an enterprise that depends on, first and foremost, on political connections and political corruption. So it cannot, but as a matter of course, corrupt politics. And what I say about the exception, just the overriding of law, and then the fix or the deep state fix or the apex fix, whatever we want to call this, is that the Cold War served as a bureaucratic rationale for exceptionism, meaning that because they blamed everything on communism, they rationalized breaking whatever laws because of this existential threat to the U.S. posed by communism. The deep state fix, for example, what Peter Dale Scott calls the gray alliance between law enforcement / intelligence agencies and organized crime, it resulted from the coincidence of the consolidation of the crime syndicate in the mid-20th century, so the Lansky-Luciano thing that really Lansky takes over, and then consolidation of the imperial U.S. national security state, whose command posts were vested with overriding power. So in 1947, the U.S. passes the National Security Act. It creates the Joint Chiefs, the National Security Council, and the CIA, among other things. So this is a real watershed in terms of creating a new behemoth. And the key figures here include the heads of the FBI, FBN, CIA counterintelligence, operations head, which was Helms for a time, and even DCIs, presumably Helms and Alan Dulles. Okay, now I'm not going to go into great detail about all of this. In fact, I'm going to mute this for a second. I just want to skip to the very end. But my point, and while I'm doing that, I'll just go ahead and say to you guys what my thinking on this was. And it was that we're all talking about, everybody has on their mind Israel and the Middle East and what has happened to U.S. foreign policy, and how in the 21st century after 9/11, it's a series of just total debacles. And they do not appear to be in the national interest, to put it mildly. And so why are these things happening over and over again? Who is behind it? It's kind of a thing on the left to not want to blame Israel, because you don't want to be like a right-wing anti-Semite who's just putting all the problems, putting all the blame on Israel, or blaming all the Jews, which is not what we want to do. And so the left doesn't quite know how to conceptualize it. I do want to put up this thing, which I didn't get to in the interview. And this is just because I think this is so mind-blowing when you think about the Iraq War. Okay, this is a map from Gary Vogler's book, and the first part here is a pipeline that you can see here. If you know the geography, it's on the eastern part of the Sinai Peninsula, the port of Eliat, or Eliat, whatever it is, and Eshkelon. You know how to pronounce it, Tonery?
I think it's Eilat.
Yeah, I think you're right. Eilat and Eshkelon, and that's on the port, and there's a pipeline there. Now, Gary had been in the oil business for a long time, and he knew guys who were in, major corporations and knew the oil trade backwards and forwards, and they hadn't heard of this pipeline. The significance of this pipeline is it supplied Israel with most of its oil from 1980 to 1994, and that oil was actually Iranian. That they were taking Iranian oil and smuggling it because they were under sanctions, so they had to sell it below market value to Israel. This took care of all of Israel's oil needs and allowed them even to sell from the port of Ashkelon to the European market. So it essentially made Israel like an oil producer from 1980 to 1994. The oil deal was brokered by Mark Rich, who was pardoned by Bill Clinton. And Mark Rich's lawyer also made millions off of these arrangements, and he was Scooter Libby, Dick Cheney's chief of staff. Now you fast forward to the Iraq War, and this is when Gary was in Iraq, Gary Vogler, and he was the oil advisor, the chief oil advisor to Paul Bremer, who ran the occupation, and Jay Gardner, who was the military officer on the side of the U.S. occupation. So there was the civilian guy Bremer and the military guy Gardner. And during this time, what Vogler writes about in his book is that they attempted to, you can see right here, I don't know if this comes up on the thing, but yeah, this pipeline right here that my arrow is pointing to, Haifa pipeline, operated from 34 to 48, and it took Baghdad oil and it shipped it from Baghdad to a port on the Mediterranean in Haifa, which is, controlled by Zionists now in Israel or occupied Palestine, whatever we want to call it. And what the significance of what happens after 9/11, after the Iraq War, Doug Feith, who later was charged and I think even convicted for passing secret documents onto AIPAC. So he's essentially an Israeli agent, and he's a high-ranking person in the Pentagon under Bush. This is a great country we have here. But he had been inquiring about how they could get this Haifa pipeline up and running again. So in the Iraq War, they actually had the plans, these neocon people, to make Iraq into Israel's supplier of oil. It would allow Israel to get all of this oil, presumably at bargain basement prices, and it would make them a transit point and the broker for selling any Iraqi oil to Europe. I mean, this was their plan. So if people that were not understanding, well, why would Israel be so obsessed with Iraq? Well, number one, you destroy a potentially very powerful military, and if they'd been allowed to lift those sanctions and Iraq could have sold its oil, they could have, again, rebuilt their military and been an actual threat to the designs of greater Israel, right? And so this is a serious motivation for that. So that I wanted to mention that because I didn't get to mention it in the presentation there, and I think it's actually really significant. You've seen those interviews with Vogler, Bryce, haven't you?
Yeah. I still haven't read his book, but it's definitely on in my list of books to read.
It's very short, and but everything in it is kind of mind blowing. I mean, every chapter was something pretty amazing to me. Okay, now I'm going to pull. The last thing I want to do is just read my conclusion, and then that'll let us talk about Kucinich and Kiriakou because they were interesting. But here's what I wrote to try to summarize what I was wanting to say. The U.S. regime in 2025 is one big, beautiful deep state fix The neocon takeover of U.S. foreign policy has been catastrophic, especially the post-9/11 forever wars. The neoliberal oligarchy of private wealth has turned every major sector of the economy into an avenue for billionaire rent-seeking. However we wish to apportion blame to Zionists, militarists, Wall Street, or the syndicate, the U.S.-led West is in shambles, with essentially no possibility of restoring its dominance. The best hope for a soft landing lies in spectacular disclosure. The truth about JFK and the other 1960s assassinations, the Gray Alliance, meaning the U.S. protection of the drug trade, 9/11/Amerithrax, Epstein, etc. Any of these could serve as a 9/11 in reverse. Maybe all of them at the same time would be really spectacular. And that could provide the shock needed for fundamental reform along lawful and democratic lines. The U.S. can no longer function as a lawless and exploitative global sovereign. Truth, reconciliation, and deep reform are the only reasonable ways forward. So, having said that, and that's, my take on why it was worth going to a 9/11 conference, even though I'm not obsessed with 9/11, and I've written articles with Peter on it, and I mentioned some of it in the American Exception, but it's not my focus at all. But I felt like this was important to say. So maybe we could, I'll turn this to you, Tonery. What do you think about this, and in conjunction with the great and surprising talks given by Dennis Kucinich and John Kiriakou, which also focused on Israel without trying to say, hey, Israel did 9/11. Because I really wasn't saying that. I was trying to explain how they took over, Zionism took over, sort of the commanding heights of U.S. foreign policy. But other people were kind of getting at the same things. And what do you think is the significance of this?
Well, I mean, if we ask cui bono, who has benefited most from the 9/11 wars? Israel. I mean, that's the elephant in the room, right? And I was really thankful that Kucinich stressed that. And then one of the things that he did really well was he talked about Bibi's particular role after 9/11 and before 9/11 too. I mean, going to Congress and testifying, and you've seen that clip of Kucinich asking Bibi before the hearing, well, what other countries should we take out? And, he provides a list: Iran, Libya, Syria. And what happened? I mean, Wesley Clark has called this, like, we were planning on taking out 7 countries, and we have taken out all of but Iran. And now where are we? We have people, very credible people like Colonel Larry Wilkerson, saying that we will probably be at war again with Iran before the end of the year. And who does that serve? Israel and Bibi.
Yeah. Bryce.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I wasn't there for the Kucinich talks or the Kiriakou talks. But was their main thesis that since Israel's the primary beneficiary of 9/11 and the subsequent wars, then we should then cast our gaze to looking at Israel's role? Did they bring up things like urban moving systems or the ecstasy
only in passing.
ring?
Only mentioned the dancing Israelis.
The dancing Israelis.
It was more like the implication was there, because they weren't really trying to say Israel did 9/11, because I don't think that's a case you can easily make, or even not easily, like you can plausibly make, because they just used other people to do it. I don't think it's in the Saudi. A lot of people focus on the Saudis, but stop and think about this. Would the Saudis attack the U.S. using Saudi nationals to advance Saudi goals and be able to get away with it? And would it even be in their interest to attempt something like that?
Well, and also, Aaron, this is why I think your work is so important. At some point, you get high enough in this nexus of organized crime and intelligence agencies, whether it's the CIA, whether it's Mossad, whether it's the GID or the ISI, it becomes one entity, whatever the modern incarnation of the Safari Group is. And I think that is where we should locate the blame for these structural deep events. And I mean, obviously Israel is a huge part of that.
Yeah. I don't know if Peter has ever elaborated on this, But he some interview a long time ago, he talks about the multiple plots that were wrapped up in what is called 9/11. Right, you have the Al Qaeda plot with these hijackers, with using the Al Qaeda networks, like tracing back to Bin Laden, and this is where a bulk of the Saudi connection comes in. You have them. Maybe they're trying to hijack planes and do something with them, but we can't talk to them, so we don't know. But then on top of that, you have another plot to take these planes and fly them into buildings for the purpose of like a terror spectacle. But then on top of that, there's also a plot to destroy those buildings. And like the way he was talking about it was that, none of these people have to be in on 100% of the plots, but the way that this deep political nexus works is that people, pick up on things. People pick up on an incoming event, an incoming deep event. Some of them, they try and short the airlines. Some of them try and, add on their own plots. But I don't know if you know whether or not Peter has elaborated on that more, because I think that speaks to the amorphous nature of this deep political system that Peter tries to describe in American Deep State.
Yeah, I spoke to Peter a few weeks ago, and he mentioned something along that line. He was all those things that you're saying, and on top of that, there's the question of the piloting of the planes. Was it remote or not? But the other one that he mentioned is that the towers were set to be condemned essentially because of asbestos and such.
Right. And then you have the massive insurance payoff for Larry Silverstein.
Silverstein, right.
And his whole role with, Tower 7 and, pull it, like...
I assume that Larry Silverstein, maybe this is a racism on my part, but he's a wealthy Jewish man. I assume that he's like Zionist. I haven't looked into the character to see, if he's actually.
I would be astounded if he were anti-Zionist. So.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact that these plots can layer on each other. It really speaks to how decentralized a lot of this stuff can be, and to point to any one set of actors and be like, oh, this was clearly a plot by Richard Blee and Alex Station, so that they can go into the Caspian Basin and get the Unocal pipeline. It was like, okay, well, maybe that was part of their motivation. But then you also have the Israelis who are talking about a clean break strategy. Maybe that was part of the motivations. You also have, the absolute militarists rebuilding America's defenses, forward-facing bases. All of these things, they're interlinked, but they are distinct.
Too. There's so much money at play. The people that are going to get to build all those bases, and logistics for oil and everything else.
Halliburton.
You have bond steel.
You have a Dick Cheney personal motive right there. That his former employer, and I don't know what his relationship was after that. Yeah, but all of that, it's there's big money everywhere. Everyone's interests can coalesce, and it's like the question of who killed JFK, right?
Yeah.
Did they kill JFK because of Vietnam, because of Indonesia, because of domestic civil rights, because of détente with the Soviet Union, because of Cuba?
Congo.
Because of Dimona.
Yeah, because of Dimona. Yeah, you could pick one and build a very plausible case for this interest group having a distinct interest in making this assassination happen. But if you focus on just one, then you have to ignore the others, which doesn't really get you a lot of play. That seems to be a historically flawed way of analyzing it. These are collections of interests. Rich people talk. They hang out. And they piggyback on each other.
Well, there's also this other issue, which is, I think, the pinnacle of state power. And under our system, the apex of power is obscure because the justification is initially nuclear weapons. If there were a decapitation strike, we would have to have a way to make sure that the regime, the will of the regime was always able to be made manifest. And so this is the pretext upon which they organize overriding power, continuity of government, or the Doomsday Project. And with that, and with, as I point out in my presentation, the words of Deep Throat saying that this is not even about Watergate. It's not even about the cover-up. It's about the whole covert operations of the U.S., and it's spectacular and unbelievable. And so I think that what we are talking about here is a level of organization in the U.S. state that we do not quite understand, that may be just continuity of government, the Doomsday Network itself, or maybe even some other related body or agency that is in charge, has overriding power. And I would argue that because the U.S. is always pursuing such criminal covert policies, clandestine policies, the exposure of these itself becomes an existential threat, as Deep Throat was alluding to when he said people are going to start dying. In 1970, I think it's 73, he says this. And then people did die. At least one Republican investigator died, like basically had a heart attack before he could launch a different kind of vigorous defense of Nixon to investigating the sex ring and so on, like a sort of precursor to Epstein. But if they deem that not only are these issues of like 9/11 and this agenda to establish full spectrum dominance, they could have asserted that that was an existential priority for the U.S., but also that none of these things could ever be exposed. And so that all these other little operations that people were running, like whatever Blee and Black were doing with those hijackers and the Saudis, whatever was being planned in regards to the investigations of the Pentagon audit, and missing money. I mean, that's another angle there that's very odd.
That alone would be a good enough reason to smash a plane into the Pentagon. Don't want to get audited. Just throw a plane at it.
So the point is that there may be other agencies that there may be another agency, especially, and one tied with continuity of government, that is in charge of actually having a big picture view of the risks to the U.S. at any given time, meaning they have to know all the clandestine operations that could be exposed and how they might deal with their exposure. And if they know what all the different operations are, they could piggyback some kind of bigger operation onto multiple threads of ongoing operations and arrangements and pull off something spectacular like 9/11, with the added kicker that they have the Doomsday Network powers at their disposal to enact mass censorship and or detainment of political dissidents. I mean, this is the kind of thing they've been practicing all the time. So it does point to the apex of power, and for us, it's a black box that we cannot see into.
Yeah, the emphasis on the black box part, because I mean, you have, again, I've been looking at the 9/11 stuff again, reading Fenton's book, and Fenton talks about this woman. Her name is Barbara. I'm blanking on her last name, but she was the person who drafted the portions of the 9/11 Commission report related to Alex Station, related to the intelligence failures, so on, quote unquote. But she was also the person to draft that very same section for both the CIA and FBI's Inspector General report. And throughout that whole section, there are systematic falsifications and omissions that obscure the role of Alex Station in deliberately allowing these hijackers to operate. But, like, who is this woman? Like, why does she have so much information, so much power over shaping the narrative? In my view, she plays a similar role to what Dick Cheney played during the Church Commission. When he was there, he had a list of things that were never to be touched, and like was able to steer the investigations away from the serious crimes, while also presenting the image of a well done, thorough report. But for that to be the case, there would need to be someone or almost certainly a bureaucracy tasked with managing and collecting information about who knows what information could be damaging, who are the key actors here in all of these deep events. Otherwise, you can't really cover them up adequately. And not to say they're perfect. Obviously, we get a lot of documents that they probably would not like us to have. But covering this stuff up this systematically requires a bureaucracy, requires
organization.
A Microsoft Teams task board for who's doing what, and that doesn't happen just on an ad hoc basis. You mentioned a few times in the last few weeks the character of Reeve Whitson in Tom O'Neill's book Chaos, where people are alluding to that he's a part of a deeper organization than the CIA. Well, something like that would almost be like a requirement if any of these deep events are connected on an institutional and structural level.
Yeah.
And that's what I think. That's what I think that that 9/11 is able to illustrate.
So, Tonery, you're as a historian, how do you conceptualize and deal with the fact that often the most fateful, important, momentous decisions are arrived at in ways that we are never going to be privy to?
Well, it's interesting. I actually had a conversation with a professor yesterday about some of my research on BCCI, and we were talking about whether or not we can produce research based on inference, because so much of this information is still classified, or it was never documented and it's off the record. And so how are we going to get to the bottom of this if we don't have a CIA memo that's attesting to our theories? So I don't know. It's very frustrating because I think some of this stuff is rather obvious at this point. To go back to our earlier conversation on some of the scientific matters related to 9/11. Controlled demolitions, the notion of explosions, just the way the buildings fell. They weren't, what you would expect if there was, a structural fire that would tip certain ways or whatever, or the fact that fires don't melt steel beams. All of those things, it's very obvious, and yet we're still sort of hung up on that in the movement, and we haven't progressed to these broader political critiques that involve your type of research, Aaron. So I don't know what the solution to that is. I guess just keep trucking along and producing work that reinforces our theories and reinforces what's already been out there, but leads us to new and more effective conversations about these topics. And I think we do need, in academia, where I'm situated, we have this tendency to lean into the specific, and it's just the way the discipline sort of teaches you, right? You're going to focus on this very, very niche topic, and you're going to write your dissertation on this very niche topic, and you're going to be working with primary sources at NARA or the Library of Congress, and it's just, you're obsessing over this, one period, 1 week in history, this one person. But what these conversations around structural deep events, we need a longer arc of history, and we need to be able to connect them, because with Iran-Contra, with Watergate, with the JFK assassination, with 9/11, you see this lineage of whether it's organized crime, the nexus of organized crime and intelligence agencies, a lot of the same people that keep popping up. A person like Theodore Shackley being involved in the drug smuggling in Southeast Asia, he popped up in my research about Dimona and was in, I was looking at National Security Archives documents, and you had Theodore Shackley briefing people on the, whether Israel sort of stole the bomb through the Numac affair. Most of the document was redacted, but I was like, oh, why is Theodore Shackley,
I did not know that Shackley had a connection with Dimona, or at least in the Dimona story.
Did he seem to be interested in getting to the bottom of it? Or was he implicated as someone who was involved in helping them get the bomb? Because I could see, I have my own idea of what Shackley was up to in those years, but I'd be curious as to what you found.
Well, the documents that I was just referencing was he was being the one that was briefing I'm blanking on who he was briefing at the time.
So like a neutral conduit of information.
The document made him seem right that he was the messenger.
Because I see Shackley as somebody who was aligned with H.W. Bush and that kind of faction of the CIA, and that he would have, I would guess that he was not down with, that he would not have been among the people like in Angleton's exact orbit. He was a different he wasn't exactly with the Angleton Bill Harvey side of things, even though he's a sinister dude. That's what I would guess. So that I'd be interested to see what he was saying about all that. So you'll have to send me that.
I'll send you the documents. I don't think you can really surmise based on the documents that I found on.
Because he's maybe being an analyst at that point. Maybe
Yes.
as weird as it was, because he was on the
could you be doing a day
side of
job?
things. So, but maybe for something like that, you would have to have somebody on the clandestine side investigating it and dealing with the people that were investigating it. So it would go beyond just analysis. He'd have to work with counterintelligence.
Well, and I mean,
such.
This just goes back to, Shackley's association with these illicit economies, and
Right.
The mob was highly involved in smuggling uranium out of Pennsylvania into Dimona.
My work
So, and
thesis
that's why
is that they want to, that they are they are mobbed up and they are involved in all sorts of chicanery, but that he and H.W. Bush represented a more American Council on Foreign Relations, Standard Oil friendly side of things, as opposed to what became neoconservatism and ultra-Zionism. That's that's why I think that all the things about him that were about all the horrific things he did, pretty much true, but I tend to think that he was more friendly to Bush, not Angleton, like a Colby, like a William Colby type of character, more or less. I'm sorry, that's a little bit of an aside, but it's one of my sort of many obsessions. It's like, what are these guys doing?
Well, there are factions in the elite, so there's infighting.
Yeah, I know you don't fully buy into the thesis, but in your presentation you used a picture or like an illustration from the Yankee Cowboy War, like the Oglesby.
Yeah. Because go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that's like one of the earliest and one of the most prominent examples of people seriously grappling with defining American history and understanding American history as these wars between these factions. Yeah.
Right. And I think it doesn't really, his overall thesis doesn't quite hold up, and it's kind of incoherent in a way, because he says essentially like the cowboy faction killed JFK, and then the
Yankees came back
and got Nixon, but it doesn't actually make perfect sense that way. I think he missed a big element of it. I think a big part of it is Lansky's ties to Israel and a potential change in U.S. policy, which I think may have gotten mitigated by the 1973 war, because Israel was actually useful to the U.S. in that regard. The war with the Arabs made it give a pretext for a big oil increase, which the U.S. needed to shore up its finances, and that seems to be a factor in the way that things shook out, because Nixon, among other things, stopped going after Lansky, and it resolved that crisis. That's a very fateful time in U.S. history. That seems to be the last sort of useful thing that Israel did for the U.S., arguably.
Yeah, well, there was always the Latin American drug trafficking connection, where Israeli commandos would be doing basically the U.S.'s dirty work. Yeah, like the Contras and stuff. Yeah. But that seems like a minor. It really seems like a kind of just like a side favor from Israel to the Americans. Doesn't seem like to be a core part of that relationship.
Yeah, and it gets them dirt on the U.S. if they do it. So it's actually not good for them to be doing that, because that seems to be what happens in Iran-Contra, in my opinion. But let's talk about, because we're almost at an hour, and I do want to talk about one last thing here, which is not a small thing, I guess. That's the Kirk assassination, which was really frustrating because it overshadowed events there. If it had not been for the Kirk assassination, we'd be still talking about the birthday book, but I think it would have been big news that Tucker Carlson had presented, made a speech to a 9/11 group that was, and I think Carlson was going to go much further than Ron Johnson did, the senator. So Kirk's assassination is very unfortunate, and it seems to, as Max Blumenthal has been reporting, there's a lot of reason to be suspicious of Israel, especially given the fact that they've proven pretty conclusively that there's nothing they will not do to advance the cause of Greater Israel, and they are fanatical about it. And one of the most crucial things for them to do is to control the discourse in the U.S. And Kirk was making a decisive turn against it, and had voiced concerns that the Israelis might kill him if he proceeded in that vein. So, you know, if either you want to weigh in on the Kirk assassination and whatever aspects of it you think are relevant here, but to me, it was so unfortunate and unlucky that it happened right then. And it also seems, you know, in the past they use it's a communist that killed the Kennedys, a communist and a Palestinian, right? And then now we're like, oh yeah, perfect patsy. Well, now it's someone whose motivation is like related to trans issues, apparently. But there has
been no motivation given yet. Like I don't even think there's a like. There might be like insinuations that they had a trans roommate and they did some left wing stuff, but there's no. The FBI says they have a note like a manifesto. Well, they said they had it, but it was destroyed. But they have evidence of what was in it.
Yeah.
And this is just one of those things that
reconstruct it somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this is just one of the classic Kash Patel like nonsense that we've come to expect from our boy at the FBI.
Why does Kash Patel also always look like he's like deathly afraid of something in these press conferences?
Probably because he is.
Yeah, it looks like there's a gun to his head that's saying like you got to say this, otherwise like your whole family will be obliterated in a drone strike. Generously, I think he just has like a slight offset with his pupils. But like it really hammers home just how wacky this guy presents himself to be. But I think like the weird thing about the Kirk assassination, I was in DC when this all happened, and so I wasn't following the day to day. But one of the first things that happened was we saw that there was this old guy who was saying like I did it, shoot me, I did it. And this old guy, I forget his name.
He confessed just today, or it came out that he said he did it so he could help the shooter get away.
That's so okay. Well, there we go. But this guy's weird because he was also making bomb threats to the Boston Marathon a few years ago.
Did you see his association with 9/11 though?
Yeah, and he said that he had.
Some of these are a little disputed in terms of I believe. I'm not sure that's totally confirmed that he was actually at the Boston Marathon, but that's. He did make a threat at a Salt Lake City marathon. I think he was arrested for wanting to blow something up there or plotting. So
this was a local Boston article.
Year later. Okay. Then maybe you've seen more than I. Maybe you're ahead of me. You're ahead of me on this.
Yeah, and it was just one of those weird things. And then like he's talking about how he was in a perfect position to see like 9/11 happen, and he was talking about I forget the whole interview, but he was talking about
Al Qaeda.
Yeah, he was like
right
he's definitely
after.
Al Qaeda. Yeah, so like this is a weird guy.
Yeah.
Have no idea what to make of it, but the fact that he was actively helping the shooter get away is interesting. But there's so much other aspects of this case. The gun that they found.
That's just a natural reaction, isn't
Mauser.
it? Just you're at a crowd and then they shoot the speaker and you just say, I did it, arrest me, right? That's something normal.
The first thing that your mind goes to isn't like, oh shit, there's guns firing everywhere. It's gotta help the shooter.
In many such cases.
Yeah. Yeah. But the other weird thing is like the gun that they found, that they said they found. We don't have to go into like the granular details.
I've heard the word Mauser used, which
the gun was they said it was a Mauser. And if you guys don't know, if our listeners don't know, a Mauser was the first story of Lee Harvey Oswald having a Mauser. Like some of the first police officers who went to the scene, they said, "Oh, we found the gun. It's a Mauser." It's like a little bit of a rhyme, an Easter egg for real JFK heads, real conspiracy nerds. But this whole case is strange. They don't seem to have anything on the guy. The guy appears to be from a MAGA family, and his dad allegedly turned him in, and he was apparently bragging about something to his Discord buddies. But that I'm not certain. It's not hard to set up a patsy these days, I don't think.
Yeah.
Well, and the whole timeline throughout the day. So apparently TMZ released footage, and he's in one outfit in the beginning of the day with a red shirt, and then other footage. He apparently had a wardrobe change. They show him a video of him limping. So I guess the insinuation was that the gun was in his pants. And then the official story was that he sort of disassembled the weapon after he took the shot, and then he reassembled the weapon and then put it in the woods. But when you look at the video that they have circulating of him running across the roof, I mean, it's immediate, and that, like, he takes the shot and then he's immediately running. A gun like that can't be disassembled quickly, so that doesn't make sense. And also that he would just reassemble and then leave it in the woods for people. Like, nothing about this makes sense. And the fact that they're not releasing CCTV footage, all of this stuff. And apparently the grandma, it said that the grandma came out and was like, he didn't do it or something. It reeks.
Yeah, apparently, like, the area that he was running through had plenty of cameras, Ring cameras especially, which law enforcement are notoriously thirsty for getting their hands on. Apparently none of this showed up in the first few days, and we had to rely on good guy Papa to turn his own son in. Like, that, this doesn't make sense. Maybe there'll be some sort of point of convergence on all the evidence, and maybe there'll be a generous case for the state that this is the guy who did it. But until then, it seems to be the dominant theories are A, lone gunman. Okay, I don't buy it. But B, you've heard of, like, the Groiper War, right, with Nick Fuentes and all that stuff going on. I don't know much about that world. All I know is that they're a bunch of crazy. I put them in the same category as, like, incels. I don't know how serious or organized they are, or well funded. Like, if a professional hit job could be organized by someone in Fuentes' orbit, maybe. But the theory that, of course, interests all of us is the Israel did it or had something to do with the theory, because that's supported by the fact that Kirk was worried about Israel in the days leading up to it, and that he was turning away from the pro-Israel consensus that exists in conservative circles, and he had, according to Max Blumenthal's recent reporting, he had just turned down millions and millions of dollars for
$150 million.
$150 million. Taking that away from, or declining it in the case for TPUSA from Zionist donors, which would obviously come with strings attached. Kirk seemed to not want those strings. And the most recent report from Blumenthal says that, a while ago he was called into a meeting with a bunch of other influencers with Bill Ackman. And the ostensible goal, in the Hamptons of all places. But the ostensible goal was to talk about Zoran Mamdani, and you got this crazy communist guy. How do we, as the right, respond to it? But then the meeting turned to criticizing Charlie Kirk's stance on Israel, and how Kirk has been criticizing Israel, has been questioning the official narrative of October 7th, and doing all sorts of things that Bill Ackman and the Zio squad felt was very detrimental to Israel. And so they started yelling at him, and he left that meeting, according to people familiar with the matter, feeling threatened and blackmailed. This is kind of important when you consider that Israel has been very and publicly worried about the turn of America's youth away from Israel. Not just democratic left-wing youth, which have always been largely, to some extent, critical of Israel, but also among the right-wing youth, right? If you're looking at managing the American political system and looking,
if you're an American nationalist.
If you're an American nationalist and you're seeing, like, your congressman and you're seeing your entire country basically just, how do I put this? Coddle Israel, basically just do everything Israel wants. You have congressmen showing up in IDF uniform and their official job. They have the Israeli flag flying right next to the American flag. You have this almost totalitarian system of censorship in which anyone who criticizes Israel is, putting a target on their back. If you're an American nationalist, you see this and it's like, I don't think this is the America that I signed up for. This isn't the American dream that I was promised in my right wing sleeps. It seems like something that you would be critical of, and more right wing youth are being critical of it because they might not have the best politics, but they're principled in the sense that they don't want foreigners controlling their country. And so as more and more people drift towards that critique of Israel, well, the thought leaders on the right are all the more important. People like Candace Owens, people like Charlie Kirk, people like
Tucker Carlson.
Tucker Carlson, exactly.
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Taylor and
Massey.
All these people. I don't think they have good politics overall. But if you're Israel and you're watching this change happen, one of the top influencers for young people is probably
the top
one of
influencer. Kirk was apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he might have been the top. I mean, there's a TPUSA chapter right here on.
They get a lot of money. They get a lot. I mean, that's the other thing that gets covered that people aren't talking about in the mainstream discussion as much. The alternative media will mention it more. Is that there's no left version of that. People talk about the left and the right as though they are two different things that are somehow in some kind of contest
parity
with each other.
Yeah.
And there is just the things that on the left that have funding typically seem like they're CIA cutouts which means that they are pretending to be left, but not really. They ultimately are for empire. Like, I think of the Nation, Democracy Now!, Jacobin, all those things to me seem to be like the old version of the compatible left that the CIA would sponsor, back in the day. Like, they're a way to make the left not a threat to them. They do fixate on cultural issues that don't have, that have probably a minority support in their more aggressive versions. And they obscure imperialism as much as they can, especially the clandestine operations. They are such credulous people when it comes to state crimes. They won't talk about it. So there is the turning points is like there is no turning points on the left. There is no equivalent whatsoever. It's something that's outside of the mainstream but far to the left. Like, there's nothing like that.
Although I wouldn't call a turning point outside of the mainstream. I do think that they're fundamentally a vehicle for the Republican Party. Like, it's a way.
And they were.
I agree. I guess what I mean is that they take whatever the sort of cultural zeitgeist is about, especially on culture war issues and things. They're more like they question settled tenets of like feminism and other things like that to a degree. They have that sort of critique of a culture war critique that is outside of what the prevailing what prevails at the moment.
It's like if you've read Angela Nagle's book, like Kill All Normies, like I think she sets up the dichotomy pretty well, where you have for lack of a better word, the woke left, creating a scarcity of virtue, saying that you have to jump through all these hoops to be considered virtuous and acceptable in modern society. Meanwhile, that generates a backlash of right-wingers who consider it to be transgressive and punk and rebellious to kind of like laugh and scoff at these social norms that are developed by the left. And I think Turning Point USA is one of these organizations that's been able to channel that backlash into, well, I mean, they're not productive for me. Like, I think they're garbage, but productive politically for the right wing. That they're training up people, they're training up organizers, and those organizers will be likely placed into campaigns or political positions or media positions where they'll be able to influence the culture further. And I think that's the big goal. And you're right, that there is the closest thing like that for the left is that you remember that Taylor Lorenz report from a few weeks ago where they have all these influencers, getting briefings from
But you could honestly see those same forces being the ones funding Turning Points. I mean, that's the other thing about it. But Tonery, what do you're as a person who's you're younger than me and younger than the 9/11 people. You and Bryce are close to the same age. What is your take on Kirk and his significance and what he represented at this political moment? Because it's very strange and fraught, and it's not as simple as just he's a right-wing white nationalist, one-dimensional bad guy.
Yeah. So I think one thing that I really want to stress is I'm seeing a lot of dialogue online from the quote unquote left, or sort of different alt media personalities saying that Kirk was a diehard Zionist. He was a diehard Israel supporter. There's no way that Israel, he wasn't doing Israel's bidding. Like he had made all these very Islamophobic tweets recently, and he was saying that Israel isn't starving Gaza, all this stuff. Things can simultaneously exist. So while Kirk was, very upfront about his support for sort of the Judeo-Christian connection that he sees the West has with Israel, and he supports sort of the Israeli state, and he makes all these derogatory comments about Arabs and Muslims. At the same time, I think he was definitely having a renaissance behind the scenes regarding a number of issues related to Israel. So maybe his stance wasn't changing about the genocide, but his stance on Israeli influence in the government was definitely changing. His stance, he was publicly questioning that. His stance on Epstein. I mean, he got up in front of at the TPUSA event recently in July, I believe. He had Megyn Kelly. Both of them were going back and forth, basically saying that Epstein was Mossad. I mean, Megyn Kelly explicitly said that. And then, I mean, the fact that it's been confirmed he went to Trump and personally lobbied against strikes against Iran. He had since then put a tweet out saying that he just the strikes. I support just the strikes, but nothing more. When we know that contradicts what Bibi wants, because Bibi wants a prolonged regime change war in Iran, and he's going to try to bring the United States in. He wants boots on the ground because there's no way that Israel can win a war against Iran without the U.S. military in full force, in an extended, prolonged engagement. And he was against all those things. Right, and then now it's come out with the gray zone reporting, and I recommend everybody watch Candace Owens' stream from yesterday, which was very enlightening. She also confirmed this. He was receiving major pressure behind the scenes from the same stakeholders that brought him up. I mean, he was, Max Blumenthal has reported on this as well. I mean, he was a creation of Zionists in many ways. He was getting a lot of his money from the David Horowitz Freedom Foundation, I think that's what it's called. And they were happy that he was talking about all these cultural war issues. He was going after the blue-haired feminists and debating people about abortion on campus. But, the moment things sort of change regarding just slightly his stance on Israel, then you see all this behind-the-scenes backlash with the meeting in the Hamptons. So I think that's really important because you can still sort of recognize that Kirk wasn't, anti-genocide, and then also acknowledge there were these other factors that he was, out publicly coming out against. So that's just something that I think people online need to make note of.
Yeah.
With regards. Those are
significant. I mean, they were significant enough for them to call him out to the Hamptons and berate him about it.
Right,
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, and Candace had made this point yesterday, why did Bibi come out immediately and lie about the letter? So Kirk wrote in response to this $150 million, quote unquote gift that Bibi was going to give him. And Bibi also invited Kirk to Israel. He denied the invitation and he denied the funds. Bibi comes out immediately and he lies about the letter. And Candace had said, release the letter in its entirety. Why would he need to do that? And also, she made another really good point. We live in the era of everything is recorded. We have, what the surveillance systems that these people have access to. Why is Israel not, why are they just sort of running media cover right now over this event and not offering up their, super high tech, surveillance systems to help us identify, this quote unquote shooter? Why are we only getting these very grainy photos? And then, none of that makes sense. So I have a lot of questions.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite something. The way it's all laid out, and then the fact that it brings in a sort of trans angle, which is culture war's sort of most useful thing at the moment. I think that
culture war fodder. Although it's strange that it's alleged that he has a trans roommate. Or partner.
Well, roommate slash, love interest in some way, romantic. I don't know, something to that. That seems to be what's implied.
Okay, I mean, yeah, it's
which in Utah would be unusual. So he'd be an outlier among the Utah Mormon population.
That's another thing that's really interesting about the fallout from this assassination is that you just see this like bifurcation of the public very clear, right? Like it's either it was a Groyper, and you see people like Hassan Piker sort of pushing that narrative, and sort of his followers falling in line, and then you have on the opposite side, it was a trans leftist and people like the Daily Wire bros and the Matt Walshes of the world pushing that narrative and their followers falling in line, and there's no room and there's
then you got people like us
yeah and
who are talking about Israel,
right?
We admit that there's not a forensic case that stretches back to them. I mean, I'm not trying to make do some alchemy here where I say like, aha, this is the case. The investigation is bungled, and so there's key points of it that are mysterious that shouldn't be mysterious, but there isn't anything that connects it to any other person that you could pin it on.
It looks like it's going to be another one of these floating signifiers until we can figure out what actually happened. Because if everyone is able to project what they want onto it, and they all have a semi-plausible case, you can nibble around the edges a little bit. But then we're in a situation where, regardless of the actual provenance of the assassination, it serves a major strategy of tension.
That's what I said too. That's what I wrote. I think initially was that this shows us that these are the decades of lead since 9/11. But in a sense,
that's the first thing I put out.
Since the JFK assassination, you could really argue that we've been living through a series of deep events that we never really fully understand, and it even down to the fall of the Soviet Union or Watergate, BCCI, so many episodes, and they seem to be accelerating. Things that we forget about, the Skripal poisonings in the UK, for example, or anthrax letters. We hardly ever even talk about those. Even the financial crash itself has things that seem to look like an inside job. 07, 08, where you're thinking if this were some kind of clandestine financial operation, it really did achieve its objectives because it was a huge shift of wealth to the very top. And
maybe there's a scenario where the Israeli deep state bureaucrat is like, hey, I got word that we're trying to remove Charlie Kirk and we just got to get him out of here. And he's calling his American counterpart. He's like, hey, can you guys swing that? And then the American guy's like, yeah, no, this fits perfectly within our years of lead scenario 419. We can set that up. We got a patsy. We got 6 in the area. You can pick which one you want to use. And they're all connected to Discord, and we can all send them in different directions. No one will know what hit them. Maybe a few people will figure it out, but they'll be marginal. Does that sound good? And the Israeli guy's like, yeah, no, that's perfect. When can it be done? Utah? Oh, all right, say less.
Well, the other part of it is, Utah and the Mormons. I mean,
this is the most deep political group of people in the world.
Lansky and Nevada, Las Vegas, lots of Mormons. The people that took control of Hughes, in the last years of his life, the so-called Mormon Mafia. The fact that the guy in the office with Jack Anderson, who was a key person. Jack Anderson was a Mormon, and he's one of the main people going after Nixon and leaking things that are damaging to Nixon, to the point that they had a high-level meeting about assassinating Jack Anderson. The plumbers did, and they tried to figure out who he was working for exactly. But his office mate was Irving Davidson, who was a lobbyist for Israel and for Hoffa and for the Somoza government in Nicaragua. And the Somoza government was one of the main governments that served as conduits for the trafficking of arms in 1948 to Israel. So it's not just a matter of Somoza as a mobbed up dictator. He actually has ties to Zionism and so on. And so, what and another one of the Watergate people who may be Deep Throat, who may be one of the composite Deep Throat characters, is Robert Bennett, who was another Mormon. So there's reason to think about the location and the Mormon angle as well as being something traditionally tied to this clandestine aspect of the U.S. state. And when you were saying that the U.S. and Israel would be talking about a potential scenario like that, I just would point out, and this happens during my presentation. When I was giving my presentation, they said that there was a 2-minute gap and that the parts where I'm talking about Adelson running the Sands Casino and that being a Lansky joint, that was cut out of the live feed and then it comes back on. But that is relevant to the idea that, like, if in the JFK assassination, Angleton uses Mossad assets, and syndicate assets, which are de facto Mossad assets, given Lansky's, role. I mean, that they seem to be running the assassination operations for the U.S. in certain ways because they kill people all the time. So if the U.S. wants to kill somebody, they just seem to have Israel, they could very well have Israel do it. And Israel gets involved in all these things like Iran-Contra and so on. So they're always there. My personal belief is that Israel has used its intimate knowledge of clandestine operations to blackmail the U.S. and basically dictate that they're going to have a monopoly on this kind of wet work, perhaps. So this is why it could have been an act of the deep state of sorts, but outsourced to Israel, to Zionists, and therefore there's no way the investigation can possibly ever yield anything because there aren't any documents in any U.S. agency that you'd be able to find that would explain it. It would be a bunch of dead ends. Similar to like in the JFK case, you do have probably the Mossad angle, but you also have all the MK Ultra documents, which were all destroyed, and the deliberations of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which were ordered to be destroyed in 1975, going all the way back to their creation in 1947. So there's a lot of reason to fear any opacity in the way that our state functions, in the way that our clandestine national security imperial apparatus functions as well. But when we do get these data points, like the fact that we used Sheldon Adelson's Sands Casino security outfit to try to assassinate and to surveil Julian Assange, that should give us pause when we think of something like this.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And like this goes back to what I said about these different bureaucracies that are required to manage something like this. Like if you have someone who's running an assassination operation, like that requires books, that requires accountants, that requires numbers, even if only on like a book on the side, like a little black journal book. But at scale, so much is involved in making all these wheels turn. Like there has to be, like, if your thesis is correct, and I think it is, that Israel is, or at least like elements within Israel, like Zionist elements, are blackmailing the U.S. in order to ensure
Zionist elements in the U.S.
and Zionist elements in the U.S. Are blackmailing the U.S. over these deep political crimes. Well, there has to be someone is keeping track of that. Like that, it's not. This isn't in the minds of 3 or 4 guys. There's files. There's lists. There's a list of people who knew what, when, where. People who did what, when, where. I mean, like that has to exist. And it's probably something like Hoover's files, right? It's the same principle. Like if you have all these files, well then you're the king.
It's power.
You're the king.
Yeah. Well, any last points anybody would like to bring up here that we didn't get to in this conversation about Kirk, or about the conference in 9/11?
I don't know. There's always just so much we can delve into, but we don't have another 2 hours to record, I assume. So maybe we should just cut it.
I think this is a good point to end it on. And Tonery, I appreciate you being here and giving some feedback from having another younger academic there at the conference is cool. And I really appreciated getting to hang out with the two of you at the conference. It was it was good to have some camaraderie and to be able to talk about these things in person, not over Zoom. It's very rare for me these days, so that's really cool. So until next time, thank you both very much.
Thanks,
All right,
Aaron.
adios.
Thanks to Dana Chavarria for producing this episode, and thank you for tuning in. I want to express my deepest appreciation to all of our American Exception subscribers. If you are not a subscriber, please consider subscribing to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. Thank you for tuning in and helping us bring light to the devil's chessboard.